My parents forced me to pay my sister's wedding while I couldn't afford rents, so I moved out. And they realized their mistake too late. I'm a 26-year-old guy. I've always been the hardworking one in my family. I live paycheck to paycheck, juggling a low-paying office job and the endless cycle of bills, rent, and groceries. Every month, it feels like I'm sprinting on a treadmill that's set way too fast. No matter how hard I push, I never quite get ahead. Still, I've always been proud of my independence. I take pride in paying my own way, even if it means skipping nights out, living on instant noodles, or working late into the evenings just to make ends meet. My parents, though, have never really noticed. They've always been partial to my sister, praising her for everything: good grades, flawless social life, even the way she dresses for family gatherings. Meanwhile, my efforts go unnoticed. If I manage to save enough to cover rent and utilities, they shrug it off like it's expected. I've long accepted that my role in this family is quiet, unappreciated diligence, but it stings more than I let anyone see. A few weeks ago, my sister dropped the news casually at dinner. She's engaged. "We're thinking about the wedding," she said, eyes sparkling with excitement. Oblivious to the tension that immediately settled over me, my parents, without missing a beat, exchanged glances and casually mentioned that they were counting on me to help out financially. "It's your sister," my mom said lightly, like that was supposed to justify anything. I felt my stomach drop. I'm already scraping by, barely covering my own rent and bills, but I forced a smile, nodded along, and told myself maybe this would be different, that my family would understand I wasn't made of money. Maybe they'd see my situation for once. I tried to hold on to that small thread of hope as I went to my room later that night, staring at my budget spreadsheet, calculating how I could possibly make this work without falling apart financially. I didn't know it yet, but this was the first ripple in what was about to become a tidal wave. A week after my sister announced her engagement, the reality of what my parents were expecting hit me like a punch to the gut. They casually dropped numbers at the dinner table, throwing out figures that I barely dared whisper to myself. "We were thinking you could cover most of the catering and the hall," my dad said, smiling as if he were talking about picking up groceries. My heart sank. I barely make enough to cover my own rent, let alone a lavish wedding. I remember sitting on my couch that night, staring at the ceiling, my fingers tracing the frayed edges of my paycheck stub. I calculated every bill, every debt, every unavoidable expense. There was no way. No matter how many extra hours I worked or how many nights I skipped meals, I couldn't make this happen without falling behind. The next morning, I tried to bring it up carefully. "Mom, Dad, I don't think I can afford this. My rent is already due and my job barely covers everything as it is." My mom waved me off, smiling faintly, like I was overreacting. "It's family," she said. "Sacrifices are part of life. You're the responsible one. We know you'll figure it out." I felt the familiar mix of frustration and resignation wash over me. My sister, of course, chimed in with the sweetest, most innocent grin. "It's okay. You've always taken care of us. Don't worry about it too much." Her words stung worse than any criticism. I wanted to scream that this isn't just about hurts, about me surviving month to month. But I swallowed it, nodded, and forced a tight-lipped smile as I walked to work that morning. Cold air hitting my face, I kept replaying the conversation in my head. The city smelled faintly of exhaust and wet pavement, but I barely noticed. All I could think about was how unfair it was. How my own family expected me to stretch myself impossibly thin, and yet never once paused to acknowledge my struggles. For the first time, I realized this wedding wasn't just going to be expensive. It was going to test every boundary I had, every ounce of patience and pride I'd built, and I wasn't sure how much longer could hold it together. The weeks that followed were brutal. I fell into a rhythm of barely surviving, working overtime, skipping meals, and cutting corners wherever I could. Every paycheck felt like a tightrope, a delicate balancing act between paying rent, covering bills, and somehow contributing to my sister's wedding fund. I'd sit at my kitchen table at night, calculator in hand, eyes stinging from the fluorescent office lights still fresh in my memory, and wonder if anyone in my family even realized how close I was to breaking. Meanwhile, my parents carried on as if nothing had changed. They called my sister to gush over the venue, the photographer, and the floral arrangements while I quietly endured the stress, always nodding along. It was exhausting. Every little detail she demanded, every new vendor payment, chipped away at the small reserves I'd built up for emergencies. And every time I hesitated or questioned the costs, I'd get a look, a half smile from my mom, or a shrug from my dad that made me feel like I was being petty for even caring. One evening, my sister stopped by my apartment with a stack of invitation samples. "I need your opinion," she said, spreading them across my tiny table. I scanned the extravagant designs, the gold embossing, the custom calligraphy, and felt a tight knot form in my chest. "These are beautiful," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but, aren't these a bit expensive?" She laughed, brushing off my concern. "Oh, don't worry about it. You've got this covered anyway, right?" The words hit like ice. My jaw tightened. Every ounce of stress, every sleepless night, every penny I'd saved suddenly felt invisible to them. I wanted to yell, to scream that I was drowning, that I couldn't stretch myself any thinner. But instead I smiled and nodded, forcing agreement. That night, lying awake on my threadbare couch, I felt a bitter cocktail of frustration and resentment. The city outside was quiet, only the distant hum of traffic and a siren somewhere far off breaking the silence. I realized I wasn't just paying for a wedding, I was paying for my family's disregard of my struggles, and deep down, I knew this tension wasn't going to fade anytime soon. It finally happened 1 month before the wedding. I opened my mailbox and froze. My rent check was due, utilities stacked up, and in front of me sat a new invoice for the wedding venue, a number so high it made my stomach twist. I had run every calculation 100 times, but the reality hit harder than any spreadsheet. There was no way I could cover both. I remember pacing my tiny apartment, the hum of the heater filling the silence, every shadow in the room suddenly feeling like it was closing in. My hand shook slightly as I dialed my parents' number. "Mom, Dad, I can't cover this. I don't have enough." There was a pause on the other end. Then my dad's voice, calm but firm. "It's family. You're the responsible one. Sacrifices are part of life. Don't make excuses." I felt my chest tighten, my vision narrowing. "Sacrifices," I muttered, almost to myself. "I can't even cover my rent. I'm not a bank. I can't do this." Mom tried to interject softly. "We know it's hard, but this is your sister. You can manage it. We believe in you." I wanted to scream. The words lodged in my throat, bitter and choking. "Do you even hear me?" I finally said, voice trembling. "I'm barely keeping my life together." "How is this fair?" My sister, who had stopped by my apartment later that evening with a celebratory grin, didn't even notice my panic. "It's going to be amazing," she said, her eyes sparkling. "I can't wait for you to see the flowers and the cake. You're making it all possible, remember?" I forced a nod, but inside something had snapped. The exhaustion, the frustration, endless pressure, it all boiled into a silent fury I couldn't voice without breaking down completely. I sank onto my couch, staring at the peeling paint on the walls, feeling trapped in a cage I built myself with my own hands, I realized. In that quiet, suffocating apartment that no one was going to step in for me. I was on my own. The thought both terrified and strangely liberated me. Something had to give. I finally confronted my parents. Sitting across from them at the dinner table with my hands gripping the edge so tightly my knuckles turned white, "I can't do this," I said, my voice quieter than I wanted. "I just can't cover the wedding and my rent. I'm drowning, and it's not fair to expect me to," my dad interrupted. Leaning back with that calm, unshakable expression he always wears when he knows he has the upper hand. "It's your family. You're responsible. You know what needs to be done?" I felt a spark of anger ignite inside me. Responsible? Responsible for what? Paying for someone else's dreams while I can barely survive? "Don't you see what this is doing to me?" My mom's lips pressed into a thin line, eyes glancing briefly at my sister who was sitting nearby, smiling faintly as if this conversation wasn't about her at all. "Sacrifices are part of life," she said again, soft but firm. "You'll manage. We know you will." Then my sister chimed in, sweet and infuriating. It's your duty, you know? You've always been the one we can count on. Don't let us down. My heart pounding, my chest tightening. I realized in that moment, they weren't asking me, they were demanding it. They had framed it as a duty, but it was an ultimatum. I wanted to crumble, to cave in, but a strange clarity washed over me. I could keep sacrificing, keep bending until I broke or I could make a move for myself. I swallowed hard, feeling a mix of fear and exhilaration. For the first time, I considered moving out. The thought alone sent a chill through me, but it also felt like breathing after being underwater too long. I realized something crucial. If I didn't act now, I would lose more than money. I would lose myself entirely. That night, lying awake on my threadbare couch, I made a decision. I was done bending. I would leave, and for the first time in my life, I would prioritize me. The only question was, would they notice before it was too late? After that confrontation, I knew I had to act quietly. There was no way my parents would let me leave willingly. They were used to having me under their thumb. So, I started planning in secret. Late at night, after long shifts at work, I scoured online listings for a small apartment I could actually afford. Every penny I saved went into a hidden account I had set up weeks ago, under the guise of emergency funds. I didn't tell anyone. Not my sister, not my parents, not even my friends. Packing felt strange. I went through my belongings one box at a time, carefully deciding what was essential, what could be left behind. The worn-out couch, the peeling wallpaper, the small kitchen with its stubborn faucet that always dripped high had grown attached to it all, but it had become a cage. The air in the apartment felt heavier than usual. The hum of the heater and the distant city, sounds outside suddenly oppressive. Like reminders of the life I was leaving behind, I kept rehearsing what I would say if anyone asked. I'm moving out to save money, or I need to focus on myself for a while. Both sounded lame and weak, but at least it gave me control. I even began imagining the looks on their faces when they realized I wasn't going to be their bank anymore. My chest tightened with a mix of fear and exhilaration. It was terrifying to finally put myself first. But it also felt like reclaiming a piece of my soul I hadn't realized I lost. Every night, I drifted to sleep exhausted but strangely lighter. The tension of pretending to be compliant fading slightly with each passing day. My secret plan became a lifeline, a small act of rebellion that gave me hope. By the time I signed the lease on the new place, I knew I had crossed an invisible line. Once I moved out, there would be no going back, and I couldn't help but wonder. When would they finally realize they'd pushed me too far? The day I moved out. I felt like I was carrying the weight of years of frustration and unacknowledged sacrifices in every box I lifted. My tiny apartment had never felt so cramped, so suffocating. Yet leaving it felt like stepping out of a cage I'd built for myself. The air outside was crisp, carrying the faint scent of wet asphalt and distant exhaust fumes. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I kept my movements quiet, careful not to alert my parents. I didn't need their arguments or guilt trips today. I stuffed clothes, kitchenware, and the few pieces of furniture I could manage into my little rental car, the trunk packed tight, my back aching and hands raw. Every step I took felt surreal, like I was sneaking away from a life that had demanded too much from me. When I finally arrived at the new apartment, I opened the door and let out a long, shaky breath. The place was tiny, a little run down, but it was mine. No one had a say over it. No one was expecting me to finance anyone else's dreams. No one was telling me I had to sacrifice my own stability for their comfort. I carried boxes in one by one, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. Later, as I sat on the bare floor of my living room, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and the faint smell of fresh paint, I realized how much of my life I had given away silently. My parents had no idea I was gone, no idea I wasn't covering another wedding payment, no idea I'd finally chosen myself. I felt a bitter sort of satisfaction watching them scramble from a distance. My sister's wedding plans were already starting to unravel, the florists delayed, the caterers calling, invoices piling up. My parents had assumed I'd be their safety net, and now they were learning the hard way that I wasn't. For the first time in years, I felt control, relief, and the tiniest spark of empowerment. But I also knew this was just the beginning. Would they finally understand what they'd lost, or would it take even more chaos for the lesson to sink in? From my new apartment, I watched the chaos unfold like a storm I'd escaped but couldn't completely ignore. My parents were on edge, pacing through phone calls with florists, caterers, and the venue. Every time the phone rang, I imagined the panic in their voices, the frantic scrambling, and I couldn't help but feel a small, guilty thrill. For years, I had been the one they relied on without a second thought, and now they were forced to confront a reality where I wasn't there to bail them out. My sister, oblivious to the logistics, called me once, her tone light and bubbly. "Hey, can you check with the photographer? He's asking for a deposit, and I know you'll take care of it, right?" I paused, staring at the phone, my fingers tightening around it. "No," I said finally, my voice firm, shaking slightly. "I'm not handling it," her laugh faltered. "Wait, what do you mean?" "I mean exactly what I said. I'm not paying. I can barely cover my own rent." There was silence on the line. I could almost hear her trying to process it. "But you always do," she stammered. I hung up before I could hear more. Relief and tension collided in my chest. I knew this would sting, that they'd try to guilt me. But for the first time, I refused to cave. Later that evening, I sat by my window, the city lights casting a golden haze over the streets, and I could hear my parents' voices raised through their calls, frustration dripping from every word. I felt validation bubble up quietly, a sense of justice settling in my chest. I'd given so much over the years, always bending to their will, and now, finally, the tables had turned. Yet there was a lingering worry: how far would this chaos go? Would my family ever forgive me, or even understand why I had finally chosen myself? I didn't have the answers. All I knew was that, for the first time in my life, I was finally untethered, and the fallout from that realization was just beginning. Despite the small surge of satisfaction I'd felt watching the wedding chaos, the isolation hit me hard. Sitting alone in my new apartment, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and the faint smell of fresh paint, I felt the weight of everything I'd lost pressing down. The freedom I'd fought for came with a cost I hadn't anticipated: loneliness. My friends were busy, work was exhausting, and my family, well, they were angry, disappointed, and distant. One night I scrolled through social media, and my stomach sank. My sister had posted a string of wedding updates, framing me as the selfish one. "So sad some people can't be part of family celebrations," she wrote, smiling in the photos with her fiancé. Comments poured in from relatives and mutual friends, all echoing her sentiment. My chest tightened, and a sharp, bitter pang of betrayal shot through me. After years of sacrifices, after every late night and skipped meal, I was being painted as the villain. I curled up on the couch, the room dark except for the pale glow of my laptop screen, and felt tears sting my eyes. My back ached from moving boxes. My hands were raw, and my mind kept replaying every moment I'd spent bending to my family's expectations. I felt utterly alone, misunderstood, drained. Even the small comforts, my quiet apartment, my independence, seemed hollow in the face of this public shaming. I questioned my decisions, wondering if I had been too rigid, too selfish, too harsh. Maybe it would have been easier to just give in, to pay, to survive another month under their rules. But something deep inside me refused. I lay there in the silence, listening to the distant hum of traffic and the occasional siren, and realized I was at my lowest point. For the first time, the freedom I'd fought for felt heavy. I wondered if I'd made a mistake, or if this somehow was the turning point I needed. And in that dark, quiet apartment, I made a promise to myself I wasn't giving up. Not now. A few days later, I got a call from my mom. Her voice was hesitant, tight, and unfamiliar. "Can we come by? We need to talk." I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. Curiosity mixed with cautious hope. When they arrived, the tension in the room was palpable. My dad sat stiffly on the edge of the couch, my mom wringing her hands nervously. For once, the parental calm I'd grown used to, the one that always dismissed my struggles, was gone. We didn't realize, my mom started, her voice breaking slightly. We thought you could handle it, but we didn't see how much pressure you were under. I swallowed, holding back the rush of emotions threatening to spill. Years of unacknowledged sacrifice, sleepless nights, skipped meals, and constant financial strain flashed before my eyes. You didn't see me, I said quietly, but firmly. You only saw what you wanted from me. I wasn't just your safety net. I was a person, with limits, with needs. And you ignored them. My dad's face softened. We were wrong, he admitted, voice low. We took you for granted. We didn't realize how much we asked of you, how much we relied on you without appreciation. I'm sorry. My sister hovered nearby, still defensive. But even she seemed to understand for the first time the consequences of her entitlement. I felt a mixture of relief and lingering frustration. I wasn't here for apologies. I wanted acknowledgement, and I finally got it. I looked around the room, at the people who had made me feel invisible for so long, and realized something crucial. My boundaries had forced recognition. For the first time, my parents truly understood that I wasn't endlessly pliable, that my time, energy, and money weren't theirs to demand. I could see it in their eyes, the weight of realization, the silent acknowledgement that their expectations had gone too far, and though the wedding had gone on without my financial hand, and though the chaos had caused some friction, I finally felt a quiet sense of justice. They had learned the lesson, but only after facing the fallout of their own making. After that confrontation, life began to shift in ways I hadn't expected. My parents' tone had softened, their requests more cautious, their assumptions about my availability and finances no longer automatic. For the first time, I felt a real sense of autonomy, a recognition that my life belonged to me, it's not to their expectations. I started to focus on myself in ways I'd long neglected. I enrolled in a short course to improve my skills at work, finally letting myself invest in growth rather than just survival. I decorated my apartment slowly, intentionally nothing lavish, just touches that reflected me, my tastes, my personality. The smell of fresh paint, the small stack of books on my coffee table, even the worn rug I'd insisted on keeping, they all became symbols of the life I was reclaiming. Occasionally, my sister would reach out, tentative and awkward. I didn't realize how much pressure you were under, she admitted once, her voice small, almost vulnerable. I nodded, letting her see that I had survived, that I hadn't resented her entirely, but also that I wasn't hers to lean on anymore. Even with the apartment fully unpacked and my routines settling into a comfortable rhythm, there were moments when the past gnawed at me, the long years of feeling invisible. The unpaid sacrifices, but I had learned something crucial. Boundaries are a form of self-respect. Saying no doesn't make you unkind, and choosing yourself doesn't make you selfish. Work was no longer just about survival. It became about growth. I could finally look at my finances without a knot in my stomach, plan for the future instead of scrambling for today. The city outside my window buzzed with its usual chaos, but inside, there was a calm I hadn't felt in years, a quiet confidence that I was finally steering my own life. I realized, with a mix of relief and pride, that independence wasn't just about money or space, it was about reclaiming my voice, my choices, and my worth. And for the first time, I felt fully, unapologetically free. By the time my sister's wedding finally happened, I had fully settled into my new life. I watched from a distance as the day unfolded, flowers perfectly arranged, laughter echoing through the hall, but I wasn't stressed, I wasn't scrambling, and most importantly, I wasn't exploited. My parents, who had once assumed I'd be their financial crutch, finally understood my absence and the weight of their expectations. I could see it in their faces. Quiet regret, acknowledgement of my boundaries, and a recognition that I wasn't theirs to bend at will. I walked through my apartment that evening, the soft hum of the heater mixing with the distant city sounds, and felt a peace I hadn't known for years. The independence I'd fought for wasn't just financially, it was emotional. I had reclaimed my time, my energy, and my voice. I realized that my sacrifices, while unappreciated in the moment, had given me the clarity to see where my family's love had boundaries and where it had been conditional. My sister eventually apologized. She admitted she hadn't understood the pressure she'd placed on me or the impact of her entitlement. I forgave her quietly, not because I had to, but because I could. The apology wasn't a victory for them. It was a confirmation that my decision to prioritize myself had been the right one. I thought back to those long nights balancing bills and wedding costs, to the times I had felt invisible, to the moments when I almost gave in. I realized that each of those struggles had shaped me, strengthened me, and prepared me for this exact moment. I was no longer the silent enabler, the family scapegoat, or the invisible worker. I was someone who stood up, made choices, insisted on respect, and in that realization I felt something profound: empowerment. My parents had learned the hard way, my sister had grown, and I had found peace within myself. I didn't need anyone's approval anymore. I didn't need to sacrifice my life for theirs. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving, and it felt incredible.